so he was out there. Obviously, he didn't get what he needed. He didn't do what he set out to do. So just that thought, like on the heel of a potential failure, he's really susceptible to making poor decisions.
Yeah, because Dad's going to be disappointed. Because they're having lentil stew. What you're massaging out of this, Gary, is that here the war has begun. He's the quiet one, always.
And mother supports him. We'll see that coming up. She whispers in his ear.
Haven't you been warned to watch out for the quiet ones?
Hey, before we jump into the podcast, we want to thank all our donors and supporters who make the Today Count show possible. It's through your generosity that we're able to shape leaders through this content and this podcast. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow wherever you find yourself coming across this content. All right, let's get to the podcast.
Hey, it's good to see you guys again, and welcome everybody to the Today Count show. We are in Genesis 25 of the Genesis Project. And if you're not aware, we have been walking through the book of Genesis. After today, Lord willing, we get through this chapter, we will be halfway through the book of Genesis. With me today is our loyal and helpful friend, Gary Harpst, Pastor Winston Harris, and myself, Jim Piper. I'm going to jump right in. We're in Genesis 25. And here's what I'm going to say, man. There's so much here that you want to listen to in this podcast. We're looking at how somebody intentionally brought the last chapter of their life out to the forefront, how he handled that. We're going to be looking at what the next generation look like. There's just a lot of stuff in here to talk about. We're going to see how the next generation was born and what that looks like. Is crazy. So anyway, in Genesis chapter 25, it starts like this. Abraham married another wife. Of course, Sarah died, whose name was Keturah. She gave birth to a bunch of people. And then in verse 3, it talks about their descendants. And verse 4 goes on more to their descendants. Verse 5, it says, Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac. Now, you might remember that Isaac was the son of he and his wife Sarah. But before he died, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them off to a land in the east away from Isaac. Just want to make sure we all got that. So this is kind of like his living trust. He hands everything he owns to his son Isaac, and then he cuts these other people free, other people that served him and his rulership, if you will, and sent them off with gifts. And it doesn't say, but I'm sure they were very generous gifts. Verse 7 says, Abraham lived for 175 years, and he died a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. He breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. This was the field Abraham had purchased from the Hittites and where he had buried his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who settled near, I do not know how to pronounce this name, Beer-lahai Roi, I'll say, in the Negev. So why don't we stop there, guys, because there's a lot there to unpack before we go. I'll start. One of the things, and I'm kind of jumping around, but one of the things that surprised me in this text, the first time I read it and every time I read it, is we have so much space in Genesis, and what we see here is both Isaac, the chosen son, if you will, and Ishmael, the one that was cast out from the family, came together to bury Abraham. Obviously, there must have been a lot that went on between the time Ishmael was cast away to Abraham's death. What do you guys think about that? And what other things do you guys see?
Anybody doing the math? I've got penciled my margin. He lived 75 years beyond Rebecca or Sarah's death. Is that?
That sounds like it might be right, but I think what stuck out to me, along with that, Gary, was he was already considered old when he and Sarah were trying to have kids, right? And though this, it said her womb was barren, so I guess I should have clued in on that. But in my mind, I wasn't sure whose physical problem
Yeah.
it was. But now apparently,
It was hers.
that,
Yeah.
that mystery has been solved.
In terms of family dynamics, it means he's got kids that range more, probably 100 years in age difference.
Crazy.
So Winston, you need to go for that.
Oh, I don't. My wife might need to join the podcast. I don't know. She might have something to say about that.
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting, especially being in ministry, the dynamics of funerals, the dynamics, that death brings, for some families, it brings out intentionality, thoughtfulness, consideration. And for others, it kind of brings out the worst attributes and characteristics. And so, though the text doesn't quite, tell us what the dynamics were, it just had to be at least awkward, right? There had to be some level of, disconnection, with the history of, these two brothers, how, they grew up presumably, and, all the, the favorite, not favorite, blessed, not blessed, as we'll see. But I think it's interesting that they were there together, and there was a level of reconciliation there that, obviously if there was some level of extreme conflict, potentially that would have been communicated, and it doesn't seem like it was that. And so you can assume there was some reconciliation there. So I think, that's pretty interesting.
Something you said, Jim, I hadn't really put together, but apparently there's, with the kind of the leadership structure, the way tribal leadership worked, it sounds like, as you point out, that he released them from that, at least a lot of the family, which would have cut down on some of the kind of inner family tensions. It turns it into more of an external conflict. But I went to chat and I said, how many descendants are there of Abraham and how many countries? And of course, nobody knows that exactly, but they estimate 19 different countries and over 500 million people.
Wow.
And I was trying to think, is there anybody else in history other than Adam that we sort of can point to one origination of the family? I don't know. Is there anybody else that's sort of in history that's pointed out as the father of lots of things, maybe in the Chinese realm or something? I don't know.
It would have to be in the Asian side, because I think even the study of world religions, Abraham is still kind of like that central figure. Not to beat a dead horse, but I think, like you guys have pointed out, what I think we've learned about Abraham now for sure, since now that he's gone, in our narrative, is that when we look at the stories that we have read and discussed, the guy seemed to be a pretty friendly guy. He seemed to be a negotiator, a deal maker, a peacemaker, an ambassador. Because overall, he seemed to be well liked, even when he did things that weren't smart, or maybe they were smart, but people were upset with his shrewdness. Might be a way to say it, and not to beat up on Sarah, but Sarah definitely cast this kid out, and here we see in a very important time of mourning and respect, this kid that's been cast out is now there hand in hand, is the picture that we get, with Isaac. So to me, it's not over till it's over, right? And it's always important, I think, for us to play the long game, in believing and hoping and trusting. And back to what you were saying, Gary. Yeah, it's kind of like in modern day, right? It's like when a new leader takes the helm, And we see so often in our culture, whether it be in corporate America, whether it be in whether it be in corporate America or whether it be in team sports, generally speaking, the new boss kind of dismisses most and then brings on his own. And I would think it just gets things moving faster versus, what would happen. The only place I know that doesn't do that, as commonplace is the church. And I don't know if it's because we're so idealistic about, the utopia, or whether our shared mission is so clear it makes it more possible. I'm not sure.
In verse 11, where it touches on, after Abraham's death, God blessed Isaac. Seemingly, just practical statement, but what it made me think about is oftentimes, you can't fully step into God's blessing until something has expired. And oftentimes, we kind of try to live in the in-between, and we try to have our cake and eat it too. And, we want, quote unquote, what God has for us, but we don't necessarily want to allow the places of comfort and the places of nostalgia, or the places of the known, the places that, we have more assurance of, and there's, more trust that we can put in the familiar. We don't want to let those things expire. And so we sometimes don't necessarily experience, all the blessing that God has for us, because we simply refuse to mourn, and it's interesting that it specifically states Isaac wasn't blessed until Abraham died. Obviously there's cultural implications there, but I think there's some spiritual ones too.
I'm convicted by that. The way I heard that was, a lot of times I don't, receive the blessing moving forward is because I'm holding on to things for security in the past. I'm convicted by what you said. At least that's what I heard. Going on, verse 12 says, "This now is the account of the family of Ishmael." And I thought that this was just as interesting as the previous section. The son of Abraham through Hagar, not his wife Sarah. And again, I might be, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the beginning of the story, the scriptures say that Abraham took Hagar to be a wife. I'm pretty sure it said that. Now, maybe I'm wrong. But then once the fracture began to happen, she was constantly referred to now back as the servant. Now, I might be wrong about that, but I could have sworn that. But anyway, so this is the account to the family of Ishmael, son of Abraham, through Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian servant. Here is a list. I'm not going to go over the list. Verse 16 says, these 12 sons, that stuck out. You guys can expose why. These 12 sons of Ishmael became the founders of 12 tribes named after them, listed according to the places they settled and camped. Ishmael, so we're just zooming through his life, lived 137 years. Then he breathed his last, joined his ancestors in death. Ishmael's descendants occupied the region from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt in the direction of Ashur, and then closes with this sentence. There they lived in open hostility toward all their relatives.
It's a wonder what God was doing in this whole, it's almost like three groups of people, his, Sarah, and then this Ishmael line, and then all the others that he sent away. There's like three different groups. And even today, so much of our world politics and center is rooted in these relationships among these people groups. And I forget who told me this, but in the tribal realm, you're either fighting with your neighbors or you're fighting with yourself, but you're fighting. And it seems like America's becoming more like that.
This section got me to thinking about when the Lord told Abraham this, when the Lord told Sarah that, when the Lord told Hagar this. told Ishmael this, told Isaac this, was God making that happen, or was God simply putting on display his foreknowledge? I got stuck on that thought when
I'm
I
doing
was
this from memory, but didn't he tell Hagar that I will make a great nation?
yes, and
So that,
he
yeah,
also
that,
he
yeah.
also said that Ishmael would be constantly in battle throughout his life, right?
Mhm.
And I take that in Old Testament terms to mean not just Ishmael, but his descendants. But
And
what do
then,
you guys think? Do you think God, when God prophesied that, so to speak, I guess you can call it prophecy because we're locked into time, and so he's pointing to the future. Is he making those things happen? Is he cursing, so to speak, or is he displaying his foreknowledge? And if he's displaying his foreknowledge, why?
that sounds like a pastor question to me.
Where's Pastor Matt? He left me hanging. I mean, where my mind went was there's just some, God principles that, for lack of a better term, mysteriously apply whether you are in covenant relationship with him or not. Seed time harvest, right? That's a simple framework where whether you believe God or not, if you sow a seed, if you do the right things with that seed, it's going to bear fruit positively. There's really generous people, right, that aren't Christians that uh, experience the type of blessing a Christian could experience if they were just as generous. And so I kind of frame that like this: that Ishmael experienced, blessing. He experienced a promise that was spoken by God, even though he was not in covenant relationship, and even though he didn't, get specifically the blessing that Isaac got. What God says still applied to him.
Build on what Winston said in the 12 tribe, put it all together. Clear back in chapter 21:14, he says, and the son of the maid, meaning Hagar, I will make a nation because he is your descendant. And he had promised Abraham that they'll bless the world and make a nation out of you. But this is a very explicit statement. There aren't too many cases where God says, I am going to do this. And this is one of these. It doesn't seem to me like it's an accident. It's an intentional act of God that he is going to make a nation. And, you notice the role 12 plays in sort of forming nations. I mean, Israel originally was 12 tribes. We've got the 12 disciples, which is building the church. And then you've got these 12 descendants of Ishmael, which he says is a nation. This 12 idea is a pattern in scripture for a nation.
So maybe it's case by case. If we go with your point, Gary, God says, hey, look, I'm going to do this. And he wanted everyone to know what he was going to do for whatever reason. And on the other case, though, of Ishmael being and his descendants being in constant conflict, I still wonder if that is repercussions for Abraham and Sarah stepping out of line, and that being the judgment for that, and then God simply wanting to point that out, not necessarily explicitly, but maybe to them it was explicit. I don't know, because one thing we know about linguistics, right, is that it's really important to understand who the audience is, because if you understand who the audience is, you're gonna have a better opportunity to understand what the author is trying to communicate, and that's kind of where I get stuck. So anyway, we start off this chapter looking at the death of Abraham, how he takes care of his estate. And then we look at what happened to Ishmael, one of his sons, that one through Hagar. And now we transition into the other side of the family, the blessed, I guess you could say, or maybe better than blessed, Winston, you use the word covenant, more the covenant side of this story, because you can be, yeah, there is a difference, right? There's a difference, just like you were saying about the generosity thing.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Gary mentioned that Ishmael was receiving this promise because he was a descendant of Abraham, which I think is interesting. And I was just talking to a friend about Exodus 20, verse 5. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. Entire family is affected. That promise was a result of disobedience.
Say that again, Winston.
Yeah.
So what Ishmael is experiencing is a promise, but the promise was only a promise from disobedience. That wouldn't even been a reality if Abraham had never disobeyed.
Bringing together in harmony what you guys are saying is, I don't like using the word curse, but I don't know what else to call it. He was both blessed and cursed. He was blessed because he was a son of Abraham. He was cursed because of the way he came to be.
You're really into some of these things that are unfathomable about God, because in the next generation with Jacob and Esau, there's a passage that says, I love Jacob before he was born and not Esau. And so the wonderment of God's plan and his purpose. And I find myself way back in it says in verse 8, Abraham breathed his last and died at a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied. Mine says with life, and he was gathered to his people. And I'm at that ripe old age stage, not 175, but maybe 75. And I find myself thinking, why have I had the life I've had compared to other people? Mine has just been rich and blessed. I haven't had some of the sicknesses in my family that some people have, or the child born in Africa that never knows any of the blessings. And you find yourself wondering, and at some point you have to let go and say, God is sovereign, but my mind doesn't want to go there. My mind wants to figure it out. It wants to know, well, why is Ishmael like this, and it's hard to let go.
It is, but go ahead, Winston.
This might be very unhelpful, but this is where my mind goes. For some reason, I grew up on the Twilight Zone, and I recently just kind of stumbled back into the Twilight Zone. And there was an episode I watched just last night, and there's this gentleman. He's a pitchman, a salesman, and 69 years old. And the episode revolves around Mr. Death. And Mr. Death meets the salesman, and he essentially says, hey, your departure date, as it's called, is tonight at midnight. And so the pitchman is trying to get out of his departure date, and he basically makes a deal with Mr. Death, and he tells him that Mr. Death tells him that there's only, certain exceptions, and one exception is something that, you would have to, some kind of life's work that you would have to have in process that would give him an extension. And so the pitchman, in real time kind of says, oh, well, I want to make, a pitch for the heavens, a pitch for the angels, a pitch that would open heaven up, and basically thinking he's tricking Death, and Mr. Death agrees to it. And then Mr. Death says, well, so when are you planning on that pitch? And the salesman, the pitchman, says, oh, we'll see, maybe next year, maybe in a few years. And so Mr. Death is like, okay, you think you can, outsmart me? Well, I had an appointment for midnight, and because you have, disrupted that appointment, I have to make other plans. And so in the context of the episode, this pitchman, the salesman, he's very fond of the kiddos in the neighborhood. And there's a specific girl in the episode that, he seems to, have a connection with, and, gives her a toy earlier in the episode. Right after that interaction with Mr. Death, this girl gets hit by a car, and she's sick, and the doctor in the episode says, "We'll see at midnight if she's going to make it." And the pitchman or the salesman starts putting two and two together, that because he didn't go at midnight, now this girl is going to take his place. And so he's waiting around at this girl's bedside for Mr. Death. Mr. Death shows up at about quarter till, and he starts making a pitch to Mr. Death, and he's selling him all these products and all these things. And it's kind of comical that Mr. Death would even engage in, there's like a tie and, just silly things. And so midnight hits, and Mr. Death misses his appointment with the girl, and now he's missed two appointments. And he starts talking to this pitchman, and the pitchman's like, "Yeah, I guess I made a pitch that opened up heaven. I guess I made a pitch for the angels. I guess I made a pitch for the supernatural." And that was kind of the totality or the full circle moment. And Mr. Death says, "So are you ready now?" And he said, "Yes." And so they go on into eternity. And I mentioned that because no matter what somebody was going at midnight, no matter what, you were not going to escape destiny. And so even when we get to Abraham and we get to Ishmael, like, God's math always maths. And so God was going to keep his word. Like, you weren't going to outsmart God. You weren't going to out God. God had made a promise, and the promise was going to happen. Even in disobedience, the promise was going to happen.
Yeah, Twilight Zone had a lot of really good moral lessons, if not some good theology in there, right?
Yeah.
Great leaders don't ignore their past. They learn from it. Every decision you've made, every mistake, every win, every failure, it's all shaping the leader you're becoming. In Story, the art of learning from your past, you'll discover how to turn experience into wisdom, setbacks into strategy, and pain into purpose. This isn't just a book about reflection, it's a playbook for growth. If you want to lead with clarity, humility, and confidence, your story matters. Learn from it. Grab your copy of Story, the art of learning from your past, where books are sold.
All right, so we continue on now, and we're looking at Isaac. And it says, "This is the account of the family of Isaac," in verse 19, the son of Abraham. When Isaac was 40, he married Rebekah. You guys remember that? We read that not long ago. The daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. It seemed to be a common thing. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins, but the two children struggled with each other in her womb. That must have been fun, carrying those guys as a mom. So she went to ask the Lord about it. "What is happening to me?" she asked. And the Lord told her, "The sons in your womb will become two nations." What a crazy thought, huh? "From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son." And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. I always think it's funny how the scriptures do that. God says something, and then we're still shocked that it actually happened.
Yeah, right.
Verse 25. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. And when I studied that, I think Esau in Hebrew sounds like the word hair. I think it was the word hair. And then verse 26, "Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob." And if I remember right, Hebrew for Jacob sounds like heel or deceiver. I don't know how heel and deceiver can sound the same, but that's because it's Hebrew. Anyway, Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. Let's pause there before we step into their young adulthood.
Here we have another nation being introduced. We had Ishmael with 12, and now we got and so Jacob has 12, and which is the next chapter. So a lot of nation building going on here.
I can't help but think about the sanctity of life. These two already have a destiny. They already have a personality. They already are driven in certain ways, or as we'll find out, not driven in other ways. Jacob, more laid back. Esau, the outdoorsman, the guy. Esau, the guy who doesn't plan. Esau, the guy you want to play middle linebacker on your football team. And maybe Jacob's the architect of the playbook. I don't know. So that's what came to me, is that when you read scripture and life begins, I mean, they're already designed. They're designed much more than fingers and toes and a heartbeat. That's what came to my mind.
It's really good. I also thought about, speaking of the nations, that keeps reoccurring, and specifically the two nations. And then we just saw the parallel between the two nations, Ishmael and Isaac. And, I may be going out on a limb here, but, what is in the physical is a reflection of what's in, the unseen realm, the spiritual realm. And so there are two nations, there are two kingdoms, right, that exist. Seemingly this pattern kind of keeps presenting itself. These two nations, these two kingdoms that are at conflict, that are at war. And so it just seems to kind of support that narrative, that idea that there is this constant, tension, that there is this duality that is going to constantly exist and be a present narrative in humanity. And so that, the two nations thing I thought was interesting, that specific, kind of framework that we keep seeing generationally here, in the story. And something that personally blessed me was just this idea of intercession. Verse 21 says, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, which, in transparency, I'm living that. I am interceding for healing for my wife.
Yes.
She's, facing some physical symptoms that, aren't, great. And, just that encouragement that, you can intercede for somebody else and God will respond. God is faithful to respond. So I love that.
It's a little bit off topic, but what you just said, Winston, about this goes back to the sovereignty of God. What was a situation where somebody sinned and God required somebody else to pray for him for his forgiveness? What was that scenario? You know what I'm talking about?
You're not talking about Job, are you? Where Job began to pray for his friends?
No, sure. I can't remember where. Yeah, I guess maybe it wasn't Job where he said, Job will have to pray for you. And all I'm getting at is when, God in his sovereignty puts us in certain roles. So here's Jacob, before he's born, God has decided he's going to do this. These things like Ishmael's group says they're going to be in defiance. But God didn't say that. They just are in defiance. And now you've got Jacob and Esau in separation. Another war, if you want to call it that, another separation. And when you said praying for your wife, it just reminded me of God puts people in roles. And, there's things you as a husband can do for your wife. And there's things that Abraham could do because he was ordained to be the father of these nations. And it's in God's will. It's not ours. And it's, sometimes we want to, what does it say in the New Testament? Kick against the goads. Remember that weird phrase that Paul heard? I always wonder, what does that mean? But we want to fight God's sovereignty. So you see a lot of that in this. Yeah.
It's like falling into a cactus.
Yeah, is that what kicking the goads is?
Well, not exactly. But
it hurts.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's good. And then we get to this exciting part where this next part sets the stage for introducing us to the shaping of this man named Jacob, who will eventually, his name will be changed to Israel, and God will be continuing his, what's the right word, revelation of himself, revealing of himself now through this nation called Israel. And so we'll be spending probably, I think it's like 7 chapters learning about Jacob, the father of Israel, I think we can call him, right? And so it says in verse 27, as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau. This is what Gary was referring to earlier, I think. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. It's so interesting to me. I mean, nowadays we would consider favoritism to be a really, really bad thing, and I still think it's bad here. Well, we know it's bad because more deceit comes down the road. We know this story. Welcome once again to dysfunctional family display. Goodness. Verse 29. One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, this story blows my mind. I mean, he obviously wasn't out there for 4 hours hunting. I'm blowing the line here. Let me stick to the script. One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, I'm starved. Esau, the elder, said to Jacob, the one holding on to Esau's heel through the birthing process, I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew. This is how, and then parentheses, the editor puts in, this is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. Verse 31. All right, Jacob replied, but trade me your rights as the firstborn. Are you serious? I have a hard time getting through. I guess this is hangry this is hangry at a degree that I've never been at. I mean, I've been hangry, but this is crazy. Look, I'm dying of starvation, said Esau. What good is my birthright to me now? But Jacob said, first you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob for some bread and soup. Anyway, verse 34 ends this way. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Lentil. Goodness. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. What an interesting way to end this chapter.
Did he not think he meant it? I mean, was it, like boys argue and jest and all this stuff? But he said he made him swear. He sounded like he's pretty serious.
Especially brothers, right? Brothers fight all the time.
Yeah. I've got 4 grandsons all close together, and my wife gets very frustrated with their behavior. And I said, that's not going to change. They'll grow out of it eventually.
Yeah.
That's what boys do. That's how they figure out where the boundaries are.
Yeah. The punches will hurt more as they get bigger. Obviously one of the leadership lessons here is, are we aware of our state, before we make big decisions in our life? Are we aware, of them? Because to me, I'm going into that kitchen or wherever it was, and I'm going to knock Jacob over and grab a piece of bread. I mean, I'm not going to get into the debate with my little brother. I'm going to punch him in the nose and take what I need.
Rather than negotiate with him. I forget, I think it was in one of our Sunday school classes recently, we were talking about sort of this in the New Testament. It talks about you have and you can't have, you want something and you can't have it, so you escalate. And it describes this hierarchy of frustration. And you realize what creatures of desire we are. We really act out of our desire. Our desire, and there's some point where you go from, I'd like this, to I need this. to gotta have it, or lust, or whatever you want to call that extreme. And when you get to that end, your reason stops. Your desire completely overrides any reasoning, and he's there, right? He thinks he's so hungry that he can't even think about, well, what are the consequences of this? And it I've been there. I mean, I get in this you can tell when you're in this state of, I don't really care about the consequences. I just want this right now.
Yeah, it's I had an opportunity to talk a little bit Tuesday morning to a group of people. Winston was there, and I was talking about that statement that Jesus made in the Gospel of Mark, where he says, basically in my paraphrase, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? And what is more valuable than a man's soul? And so we talked about the soul. And, as theologians have put together over the centuries, our best idea of this very real but invisible part of who we are is, besides the fact that it is the actual location of our being, you could say it's the address of our being. God always knows where to find us based upon our soul. But in the interchanging part, you have your affections or emotions, you have your rational, your intellect, and then you have the what I would call sum total of those two things, which would be your willpower or your will, your volitional will. And I don't know about you, but I think what we're doing is we're reading a story here about things that I've done in my past where I've made a decision out of affection, out of emotion, to regret it. And I think I've been learning in life that being very self-aware of my emotional state is important, to practice emotional intelligence, keep my mouth shut when it should be shut, saying something with courage when I should say something, doing, not doing. We can go on and on with the examples, but a lot of the success or failure of that has to do with my emotional state and paying attention to my emotional state. Now, I'm not judging Esau too harshly because, I wonder how long he was out there. I'm just guessing. He probably took some bread with him, and he might have been gone for a week. He might have been gone for several days. I guarantee you he didn't take his rifle. He didn't have one, right? It had to be bow and arrow and, I don't know, maybe a club to jump on a boar, wild boar, a knife. Who knows? But nonetheless, there it is, an emotional, because the body, his body could have withstood more, but your body is still extremely important to the soul. Otherwise, there'd be no need for the resurrection. So we know that the body has power to also influence the soul and vice versa. Those are my thoughts on that.
You said something that just kind of made me think when you were kind of describing, what Esau was actually doing. It says the boys grew up and Esau became a skillful hunter. So he was out there. Obviously, he didn't get what he needed. He didn't do what he set out to do. So just that thought, like on the heel of a potential failure.
Yeah.
He's really susceptible to making poor decisions.
Yeah, because Dad's going to be disappointed. Because
this is what he does.
They're having lentil stew.
Where was the meat?
He was responsible. I didn't think about that extra piece there, Winston. So Dad is salivating, waiting for his champion son, his quote favorite unquote son, and he comes home empty-handed.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that already that Jacob. Yeah. Okay. That's good.
It kind of reminds me, I hadn't thought about it either from a standpoint of Jacob using Esau's weakness against him. And, I guess from football or strategy or whatever, those are the kind of things you want to do. But there's something really sort of feels more evil when you take the natural disposition of someone
Yeah.
and leverage it for your own gain.
Yeah.
And we were talking in Sunday school about desire and things that tempt us and all that. And I said, so what is it? If you want to tempt, what tempts you? And I said, if you're a teenage boy, what tempts a teenage boy? And the girls immediately talked up, well, they like to see a little more skin. And, they know that. And you can use those things against the way God has made us. Men are visual, or I don't mean to make this as we're the guilty ones. I mean, well, there's plenty of blame to go around here. But there's something particularly evil that, Jim, if I know you're addicted to ice cream and I keep putting it in front of you.
I am.
Yeah, you get my point? Or
I
it's
do.
yeah, and
Well, that's what we call
Jacob knew exactly what he was doing.
a stumbling block.
Yeah.
Well, didn't we just read up here? The Lord told Rebecca that. Oh yeah, here we go. In verse 23, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. Well, the whole art of war is when you're weak to look strong, and when you're strong to look weak. And so the art of war is based on deception. And so what you're massaging out of this, Gary, is that here the war has begun.
Yeah.
And
Jacob's using his natural.
Esau lost.
He's good at this.
Yeah. Well, he's the quiet one. Always.
And mother supports him. We'll see that coming up. She whispers in his ear,
Haven't you been warned to watch out for the quiet ones?
Yeah.
But to your point, Jim, if their destiny is already set in that verse 23, one people will be stronger than the other. So there's already a predestined responsibility for Jacob based off of his design. So are we seeing both reasons why one is going to be responsible for what they will be responsible for, and why one wouldn't be? Like Esau couldn't even be trusted with his own birthright. Why would he be trusted with the nation?
That's a good point. Yeah.
He can't be. He's going to he's going to trade you the minute that he feels like he needs to. Well, man, what a good introduction to the life of Jacob. That is where we're going to spend like I said, I think our next more or less 6 or 7 chapters before we then are introduced to I would call the main latter character of the book of Genesis, the life of Joseph. Good seeing you guys today. Thank you so much for sharing Genesis 25 with me. I'll see you Genesis 26.
Thanks for spending part of your day with us on the Today Count Show. If today's conversation encouraged you, challenged you, or helped you grow, share it with someone in your circle, because we're better when we grow together. And be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected with us on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And remember, real change doesn't happen someday. It happens today. Until next time, keep showing up, keep building, and keep making today